I never thought turning 70 would feel like waking up in a different time zone every night. It started subtly, at first an unusual stirring at 1:47 a.m., a heart that ticked faster than usual, and a restlessness that didn't exist in my 50s. At first, I brushed it off as the normal rhythm of aging, the kind of thing doctors casually mention in checkups, but rarely dwell on. Yet the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Night after night, my sleep fractured at odd hours, leaving me groggy, anxious, and frustrated. The curiosity that had carried me through decades of reading and research kicked in. I needed to understand why this was happening, and more importantly, if it could be fixed. What I discovered shocked me. The culprit wasn't just old age, it was chemistry. My body, I realized, had a nightly routine of its own, one I hadn't fully understood: cortisol. The stress hormone was supposed to decline after sundown, allowing my brain to settle into deep restorative sleep. Instead, mine stayed stubbornly elevated, peaking at exactly the hours I dreaded. Waking at 3:12 a.m. became as predictable as sunrise. I started reading scientific studies, even reaching out to researchers who were quietly exploring how hormones shift with age. I found that cortisol surges at night weren't inevitable. They could be modified, sometimes dramatically, with the right approach. I began to notice patterns in what I ate, how I moved, and even how I prepared for bed. It wasn't just a matter of going to sleep earlier or avoiding caffeine in the afternoon. Though that helped, it was about what I put into my body hours before I ever saw the bedroom ceiling. Vegetables, it turned out, contained compounds that interacted with my body's stress system in subtle but powerful ways. Some acted like a switch, turning down the fight or flight response, while others fed my gut bacteria in a way that produced calming neurotransmitters. I learned that timing, preparation, and portion were critical. Too early or too much could undo the benefits entirely. One night, after a particularly restless stretch, I decided to experiment systematically. I wrote down what I ate, the exact times, and my sleep interruptions. I roasted a single red bell pepper, timing it precisely 90 minutes before bed, and drizzled it with a teaspoon of olive oil. I noticed almost immediately that my heart rate settled faster than usual as I drifted towards sleep. The next night, I tried a small portion of purple sweet potato that had been cooled after steaming, topped with a dash of cinnamon. By the third night, I realized that my waking at 3:12 a.m. was less jarring. I could drift back into sleep without that restless alertness that had haunted me for months. What struck me most was the realization that these nightly disturbances weren't a punishment for aging. They were signals from my own body highlighting where balance had slipped. Cortisol, once an invisible saboteur, was now something I could observe, manage, and even quiet. The connection between what I ate and how I slept felt almost magical, but it was grounded in real chemistry: antioxidants, phytonutrients, resistant starches, and minerals acting in concert to shift my physiology toward rest and repair. I started journaling each night, noting small changes: the color of my bell pepper, the cooling of my sweet potato, the timing of garlic sautéed with dinosaur kale, and even the sprouting day of broccoli seeds. It became less about perfection and more about consistency, learning my body's rhythm and responding to it intentionally. I realized that sleep wasn't just a passive state. It was an ongoing dialogue with my body. Each night offered clues, each vegetable a potential key. Sleep deprivation had taught me patience and observation. It also revealed the degree to which modern advice can overlook the chemistry of aging. Doctors often reassure older adults that waking at night is normal, but rarely do they explain the underlying processes or how simple dietary choices can intervene. My exploration was, in a sense, a reclamation of control, a way to understand why my nights were fractured and how I could coax my body back into harmony. By the end of that first month, the pattern of my sleep began to shift. The startling, jarring awakenings at 1:47 a.m. and 3:12 a.m. didn't vanish overnight, but the panic and restlessness that had accompanied them faded. I began waking more gently, sometimes even transitioning back into dream-filled slumber without the heart racing or mind spinning. I could feel the changes in my mood, energy, and clarity during the day. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but undeniably real. Through this journey, I also discovered the joy of experimentation and discovery. Cooking became a deliberate practice rather than a chore. I learned the nuance of roasting a red bell pepper to blister the skin without overcooking steaming purple sweet potatoes to preserve their anthocyanins, and preparing sprouts to maximize the bioactive compounds that influence stress responses. Each small ritual became a part of the larger experiment of living well in my 70s. What this taught me is that the narrative of sleeping poorly because you're old is incomplete. Age is only part of the picture. Chemistry, diet, timing, and routine are equally powerful determinants of rest. The nightly battle with cortisol and restlessness is not something to accept passively. It's a system that can be observed, understood, and nudged toward balance. And once you begin paying attention, the rewards extend beyond sleep. Sharper thinking, calmer mornings, and a renewed sense of control over your own body. I've come to view those early hours, once my enemy, as a laboratory of insight. They taught me to notice the subtleties of my body, to respect the invisible rhythms that govern stress and rest, and to harness the tools that nature provides in vegetables, timing, and preparation. Sleep is no longer a mystery to me. It's a practice, a craft, and a daily dialogue that I can influence in tangible ways. The more I studied my own nighttime awakenings, the more I realized that cortisol was at the heart of the problem. I had read about it in passing, the stress hormone peaks in the morning, but I hadn't truly understood how it affected someone like me, 70 plus, who otherwise considered myself healthy. It wasn't just a chemical that responded to stress. It was a quiet puppeteer of my sleep cycles, subtly dictating when my brain would stir, my heart would race, and my body would refuse to settle back into rest. I began thinking of it less like a hormone and more like an alarm system that had become misaligned. To test my theories, I started paying attention to my own cortisol patterns first through observation and then with a little help from modern tools. There are devices now that track heart rate variability and give rough approximations of stress hormone activity. On nights I skipped a carefully prepared red bell pepper or neglected my cooled purple sweet potato, I could see the differences, spikes in alertness, tossing and turning moments where I lay staring at the ceiling, feeling that chemical surge in my chest. It was undeniable. My body was following a rhythm I hadn't controlled, and yet I could see a pattern emerging in response to what I ate and when. What struck me most was the realization that doctors rarely framed sleep this way. At appointments, I'd hear, "It's normal for older adults to wake at night or try a warm bath. Avoid caffeine." Helpful perhaps, but these suggestions treated the symptom, not the root cause. When I dug into research papers, I found studies showing that cortisol secretion in older adults is more easily disrupted than most realize. The glands that produce it, the hypothalamus and adrenal system, remain reactive long into old age, meaning that even minor dietary and lifestyle signals could amplify a late-night spike. I wanted to understand this system in detail, not through textbook definitions, but through personal experimentation and observation. I began to map out what I could control. Timing was everything. A late dinner, a snack too close to bed, even the order in which I ate vegetables each had subtle effects. I discovered that roasted red bell peppers carefully timed 90 minutes before sleep seemed to calm my system. Purple sweet potatoes prepared with the cooling step to maximize resistant starch acted as a slow-release signal to the brain, gently lowering my cortisol response as the night progressed. Celery roots sautéed with coconut oil introduced compounds that appeared to smooth the nervous system's electrical activity, a phenomenon I could feel in the way my body settled into bed. One night, I tried combining them in a sequence I had devised almost as an experiment. I began with a roasted red bell pepper, then a small portion of cooled purple sweet potato, and finally a tiny serving of lightly sautéed celery root. I timed each bite carefully, allowing my body to absorb the nutrients without overwhelming my digestive system. I lay in bed expecting the usual tossing and waking. Instead, I drifted almost immediately into a deep, uninterrupted sleep. When I woke hours later, it was calm and natural, no racing heart, no startled awakenings. It was the first time in months that my body seemed in sync with the night. I kept a detailed journal of these nights. I noted how my sleep quality correlated with not just the foods, but the timing, the portion sizes, even the preparation method. The details mattered more than I had imagined. A raw bell pepper wouldn't have had the same effect as a lightly roasted one. A purple sweet potato eaten hot without cooling didn't provide the same slow release effect. I realized that age had not robbed me of control. Rather, I had been unaware of how to use the tools my body needed. This journey also revealed how interconnected the systems were. Blood sugar stability, gut bacteria, neurotransmitter production, and hormonal rhythms weren't isolated, they were deeply interwoven. Anthocyanins in purple sweet potatoes, I learned, supported beneficial gut bacteria, which in turn influenced neurotransmitters like GABA that calm the amygdala. Minerals like magnesium and calcium worked synergistically to signal to my brain that it was safe to rest. Even tiny enzymatic processes in sprouts had cascading effects on gene pathways that influenced stress responses. It was astonishing how a few carefully chosen foods prepared with precision could orchestrate such a profound effect on a 70-year-old body. I also learned the value of patience. These changes weren't instantaneous. Cortisol regulation, I discovered, responded over days and weeks. Consistency was far more important than intensity. One perfect night followed by careless meals didn't undo everything, but a string of thoughtful timed interventions gradually rewired my stress response. I became attuned to my body's subtle signals, heart rate, digestion, even mood shifts in the late evening as indicators of whether I had maintained the rhythm. By documenting my experience, I realized that this knowledge could be shared. Many older adults accept restless nights as inevitable, unaware that minor shifts in diet and preparation could profoundly influence sleep quality. I started sharing my insights with friends, neighbors, even distant family members. Reactions ranged from skepticism to astonishment, but when people tried small steps like a roasted bell pepper or a cooled purple sweet potato, they reported similar patterns: smoother sleep, calmer awakenings, and less anxiety during the night. Ultimately, what I learned during this phase of my journey is that age-related sleep disturbances aren't purely chronological. They are chemical and physiological. Cortisol, once misunderstood as an untouchable force of nature, can be influenced by diet timing and preparation. With careful observation and a willingness to experiment, it is possible to restore a sense of control over sleep even past 70. My nights no longer felt like a battle. They became a series of deliberate choices, small rituals that guided my body back into harmony and allowed me to reclaim rest that I had long believed was lost. Once I understood that cortisol was the primary barrier to my sleep, I turned my attention to the tools I could actually use to influence it: food. Specifically, I discovered that certain vegetables contained compounds capable of gently nudging the nervous system into calm, promoting restorative sleep without medication. At first, it sounded almost too simple to be true, but the more I experimented, the more I realized that nature had quietly provided solutions I had overlooked for decades. I began with the 5 vegetables that seemed to have the strongest anecdotal support and small-scale research behind them: red bell peppers, purple sweet potatoes, celery, root dinosaur kale, and broccoli sprouts. Red bell peppers were the first revelation. I learned that their deep red color indicated the presence of capsinthin, a compound that, according to some nutritional chemistry texts, can influence stress-related pathways in the brain. Timing and preparation proved critical. Raw, they could stimulate digestion too strongly and counteract the sleep-promoting effects. But roasting at 375 deg for exactly 12 minutes until the skin blistered released the compound most effectively, and pairing it with a teaspoon of olive oil increased absorption. I made this a nightly ritual: a single pepper roasted and cooled, eaten precisely 90 minutes before bed. Almost immediately, I noticed a reduction in that sudden jarring alertness that used to wake me at 1:47 a.m. It was subtle at first, a gentle easing of the body into rest rather than a dramatic blackout of alertness, but the change was undeniable. Next, I explored purple sweet potatoes. Unlike their orange counterparts, the purple varieties contain anthocyanins, powerful antioxidants that also seem to interact with my gut microbiome. I steamed them whole skin on, then cooled them in the refrigerator for 2 hours to convert some of their starch into resistant starch. The first time I ate a cold slice with a sprinkle of cinnamon and a dab of almond butter an hour before bed, I felt an unusual sense of calm. Over several nights, I noticed that my awakenings were less abrupt, my mind less racing, and my body seemed more willing to enter deep sleep. The cooling process in combination with cinnamon, I learned, helped stabilize blood sugar and provided a slow release of compounds my brain could convert into melatonin. Celery root was next, and it surprised me. Ugly and gnarly, it had never seemed appealing, but it contained threne butylide, a compound with calming properties on the nervous system. Cooking was everything. Sautéing cubed celery root in coconut oil for exactly 8 minutes released the maximum benefit. I ate it 45 minutes before bed with a glass of warm water. That first night, I felt my body literally ease as I lay down. I had read studies suggesting that these compounds could reduce nocturnal awakenings in older adults. And while my experience wasn't a controlled study, it felt transformative. Each night I became more attuned to how different textures and cooking methods affected absorption and effectiveness. Dinosaur kale, or lacinato kale, was my next experiment. I discovered that not all kale was equal. The flat, tender leaves of dinosaur kale contained more bioavailable magnesium than curly varieties, and magnesium is one of the most reliable natural regulators of the nervous system. I massaged the leaves with avocado oil, added a pinch of sea salt, and sautéed with garlic for exactly 4 minutes, letting the leaves wilt but remain vibrant. The magnesium combined with calcium and vitamin K2 worked synergistically. I noticed that my late-night heart palpitations reduced, and my body transitioned into rest much more fluidly. Timing was again crucial. I consumed it exactly 2 hours before bed, allowing the minerals to reach therapeutic levels in my cerebrospinal fluid just as my first deep sleep cycle began. Finally, I experimented with sprouted broccoli. This was perhaps the most remarkable. Sprouts at 3 to 5 days of growth contain sulforaphane, a compound that influences cellular antioxidant pathways and stress responses. I sprouted them myself, rinsing and draining twice daily until tiny white tails appeared, then chopped and let them sit for 40 minutes before consuming, sometimes adding a teaspoon of mustard seed powder to amplify enzyme activity. 30 grams became my nightly dose taken 3 hours before bed. Within weeks, I felt a cumulative effect. My awakenings became rare, my sleep cycles more regular, and even my mornings improved. I woke with energy and clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I realized that sprouted broccoli didn't just calm my body for one night, it appeared to recalibrate my system gradually over time. Throughout this process, I faced setbacks. Eating too much of any single vegetable too late could disrupt sleep. Skipping the precise cooling or cooking steps diminished their effect. Yet the experimentation was enlightening. It taught me patience, observation, and precision. And more importantly, it revealed the intimate connection between diet and hormonal balance. By the end of this journey, I had a nightly routine of vegetables prepared with care, timed exactly, and consumed with intention. This simple yet powerful practice transformed not just my sleep, but my relationship with food, time, and my own body. I could feel the chemistry working a quiet recalibration that restored harmony to my nights and gave me back control over a part of my life I had long assumed was lost to age. After weeks of consistently following my nightly vegetable regimen, the transformation in my sleep was profound. The once familiar jolt, awake at 1:47 a.m. or 3:12 a.m., became a rarity rather than an inevitability. I began to notice patterns I had never recognized before. Subtle shifts in my mood, energy levels, and cognitive clarity during the day directly tied to how well I slept the night before. The change wasn't instantaneous. It was cumulative, like tuning an instrument gradually until each note resonated perfectly. Each vegetable, each preparation method, and each timed bite worked in concert to guide my body toward deep restorative rest. The most remarkable part of this process was the awakening of awareness about my own biology. I realized that sleep wasn't something passive that simply happened when I closed my eyes. It was a complex dialogue between the nervous system hormones and even the gut. By incorporating red bell peppers, purple sweet potatoes, celery, root dinosaur kale, and sprouted broccoli, I wasn't just feeding my body, I was communicating with it. Every meal became a conversation with my brain, signaling it to relax, to release tension, and to allow the natural cycles of sleep to proceed unimpeded. The timing and preparation of these foods were as important as the act of eating itself. I had inadvertently entered a nightly experiment that combined culinary precision with a form of biochemical engineering. Beyond the direct benefits to sleep, I noticed secondary effects that were equally astonishing. My mornings felt lighter, clearer, and more energized. The grogginess that had once lingered for hours after waking vanished, replaced with a sense of readiness to face the day. My mood stabilized in ways I hadn't anticipated. Small irritations no longer spiraled into frustration, and I felt a renewed sense of calm throughout the day. Even my digestion improved as the careful balance of fiber-resistant starch and fat from my nightly vegetables regulated my gut microbiome and supported overall metabolic stability. I began to understand that good sleep was not an isolated outcome, but the center of a network of health benefits that radiated through my body. I also reflected on how easily these changes could be overlooked by conventional advice. The medical community often emphasizes sleep hygiene, avoiding caffeine late in the day, maintaining a regular bedtime, but rarely delves into the chemical intricacies of hormones and diet. By understanding cortisol and how my body responded to specific compounds in vegetables, I had unlocked a level of control that was previously dismissed as normal aging. This insight transformed not just my nights, but my perspective on health itself. Age, I realized, was not a sentence to restless sleep. It was an opportunity to refine habits and engage with my body in more thoughtful, deliberate ways. Part of the transformation was ritualistic, almost meditative. Preparing vegetables for the evening became a form of intentionality, a signal to my mind and body that the day's stress was ending. I would roast a red bell pepper steam and cool a purple sweet potato, saute celery root in coconut oil, and prepare dinosaur kale with care. Sprouted broccoli became the final touch, its preparation precise, almost sacred, as I measured 3 tablespoons and allowed the sulforaphane to activate. These actions grounded me, gave me agency, and created a sensory pattern that primed my body for rest. By the time I laid down, my nervous system had received clear signals. It was safe to relax, safe to release cortisol, safe to enter deep sleep. Interestingly, these habits encouraged me to re-examine other aspects of my life. Daytime routines, light exposure, and physical activity all began to feel interconnected with sleep in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. I found that morning sunlight, brief walks, and even mindful breathing throughout the day amplified the benefits of my nightly vegetable regimen. My body was learning to maintain balance over a 24-hour cycle rather than reacting in fragmented bursts of stress at night. It was a subtle but profound shift, transforming the way I approached aging itself. Perhaps the most important lesson I took from this experience was patience and consistency. These vegetables didn't create instant results, nor were they a miracle cure. Their effects were gradual, compounding over days and weeks, teaching me that sustainable change requires repetition, attention to detail, and respect for natural rhythms. Skipping a night or preparing a vegetable incorrectly didn't ruin progress entirely, but consistent practice created cumulative benefits that reshaped my sleep architecture. My body relearned how to regulate cortisol, my brain relearned how to enter deep restorative states, and my nights transformed from fragmented stretches of alertness into seamless passages of rest. Looking back, the journey from restless nights to restored sleep was more than just a dietary experiment. It was a reclaiming of autonomy. By understanding the chemistry behind my sleep and engaging deliberately with it, I gained control over a domain often resigned to aging. Each bite of carefully prepared vegetables became a tool, each timing adjustment, a key unlocking a cycle of rest, repair, and renewal. My experience revealed that the right combination of knowledge, observation, and practice can profoundly change what many accept as inevitable poor sleep in later life. As I reflect on these changes, I realize that transformation isn't just about what we eat, but how we interact with our routines, how we observe patterns, and how we engage with our bodies. Restored sleep has not only improved my nights, but enhanced every aspect of daily life, from mental clarity to emotional stability to physical energy. And while the journey began with frustration and insomnia, it ended with empowerment and a deeper appreciation for the subtle forces that govern health, showing that even in our 70s, we can actively shape the quality of our sleep, and by extension, the quality of our lives.